Welcome back to a new episode of Podcast on the Brink. It's the middle of August, but as you know, on Podcast on the Brink, we're always talking hoops. Not sure that's the case everywhere in the Big Ten, but that's life at Indiana. And today I wanted to maybe expand a little bit beyond Assembly Hall and go out to the East Coast and talk about, one of the programs that, in my opinion, this season is going to be one of the more intriguing teams to watch in the Big Ten. That's Rutgers. Brian Fonseca of New Jersey Advanced Media and the Star Ledger, kind enough to join us this week on Podcast on the Brink. Welcome back to the show, Brian.
Always a pleasure to talk ball with you, man.
So I mentioned the Ace Bailey, Dylan Harper, additions to Rutgers. And I'm kind of curious, just from a big picture perspective. It's not often that we see, I can't recall a time where Rutgers has had this much hype going into a basketball season. These two guys are, depending on where you look, projected to be top 5 picks potentially in next June's NBA draft. There's been a lot of NBA talent come through the Big Ten over the years, but a lot of the recruiting rankings, the top players typically are going to the SEC, ACC, Big 12, other programs. The Big Ten's kind of been behind in recent years in getting these top flight kids. So it's different to have those type of players coming into the Big Ten. How did this all come about for Rutgers? Obviously, we know the connection with Dylan Harper and his brother playing previously at Rutgers, but to get two guys of this caliber, how did this come about for Rutgers to be able to land these two kids?
We're still kind of piecing it together ourselves, right? It's kind of crazy to think about, and even months after the fact, it's nuts to see this collection of talent at Rutgers at a place where, for 50 years since they went to the Final Four last time, there just hasn't been anywhere near a kid as talented as either one of them. Now to have two. Dylan Harper, you mentioned, Rutgers had the leg up, knowing his family really well, having coached his older brother and developing him from kind of a low-ranked recruit into one of the best players in the Big Ten, their best player and arguably of the 21st century outside of Quincy Douby. So that was always an advantage, and Dylan went to countless games growing up. He was a fan of Rutgers, obviously, and he likes the coaching staff. He feels comfortable with them. But what helped get him on board was getting Ace Bailey on board. That's a little different, obviously, and a little bit of a bigger hit. Ace Bailey was, neck and neck with Cooper Flagg, and some people argued he was the best player in this class. So to get him is obviously huge. He has a connection. Brandon Knight, I should say, the assistant coach, who's huge in getting these two guys. He's a massively good recruiter, which is why he gets paid the big bucks. He has a connection to Ace Bailey's agent, Omar Cooper. And that is a lot of where this, the connection comes from. And he got on him and his now teammate, JaMychal Davis, early. Those guys are two best friends. They brought JaMychal Davis into the 2023 class. And that helped him feel even more comfortable. But I think that connection, that long-time connection, kind of really helped there. And then the details of which will, eventually iron out. But that's like the genesis, really. And then once you get him to commit in kind of a spectacular way after they win an overtime game at home at the RAC against Ohio State in a wild environment. He gets swept up in the emotion, commits to Rutgers. And the day, a couple days before, he's on the phone with Dylan Harper saying that he's got to join him at Rutgers. And Dylan Harper is saying, if you commit, I commit. And Dylan Harper ended up committing December last year. I think it was kind of a, unspoken agreement months beforehand that this was all going to come together. And now it is. And I think it's been just the ramp up to the season is going to be just fascinating, because I think you're right. This is, to me, the most intriguing team in the Big Ten. I think this will be the most successful season at Rutgers in a long, long time, because if it isn't, it'll be a huge disappointment. This is essentially a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Rutgers, I would bet a large sum of money, will never, ever have two lottery picks on its roster in the same season again. So you got to take advantage of it.
So what was the relationship between Harper and Bailey before kind of this partnership came together? Were they close friends? Were they acquaintances? Had they played together? How well did they know each other before they both decided to commit to Rutgers?
Well, in the months before Dylan publicly announced, they played together a lot. They played together at this all-star event at Rucker Park in New York. They combined on Ace Bailey's AAU team, Athletes of Tomorrow, and played for a weekend. They were in constant communication. They grew to be really close friends, apparently, talking all the time, texting. Once they met, kind of really understand each other and get along really well. So I definitely think that helped. I mean, when Ace Bailey signed his letter of intent to officially become the highest ranked player to ever sign at Rutgers. He did it in Georgia at his high school. Dylan Harper was there with his mother. These are the things that, there was a game. Dylan Harper was in high school, his senior year, before Ace Bailey committed. I think a day or two before, Ace Bailey was in New Jersey, obviously about to take his official visit, and he went to the game to go watch Dylan Harper. These guys grew to be close friends. I don't think it was ultimately the biggest factor, but I think it was one of the bigger factors that helped bring this along. Because obviously, if they didn't get along, they wouldn't want to play with each other. I think they very clearly want to play with each other and do some, special things at Rutgers.
So I want to dig in later to the roster and how all these pieces fit together. But I first want to ask you, because you've seen these guys play a lot. Obviously, I've seen film. I've not seen them in person, and you can read various things. You want to go to ESPN, looking at the draft predictions for next year. You can go to various mock drafts, and both of them are regarded as potential lottery picks for next summer. But I want to start with Ace Bailey. What in your mind, from seeing him play, what makes him such a special, unique talent, and how does he impact, games in terms of winning from day one at Rutgers?
Physically, the size is there, and he's huge. He's 6'10". He's really long. He's got the prototypical NBA size that just doesn't walk through the door every day. So he has that. They feel really good about his athleticism. They think he has the potential to be a really, really good defender. Whether he can become that in 1 year in college with college coaching is, that's up in the air, but I think they believe the potential is there. What really makes him such a highly touted prospect is his ability to hit some of the hardest shots I've ever seen a high school kid hit. And when he gets hot, he is one of the best shot makers. He is the best shot maker of this class, and he is one of the best shot makers I've ever seen, just when he's at his best. The issue, though, with making tough shots is you have to take a lot of tough shots, and sometimes he'll take some really, really inadvisable shots and out of rhythm, mid-range, leaning back, fadeaway jumpers that you probably just don't have to take. So I think the biggest thing they have to work on with him is just shot discipline and understanding when to try things, when to not. But it just feels like he's tempted to take those shots because he can, right? He played a game at the Rack for his high school in December, and there was a stretch where he hits these ridiculous 2 shots in mid-range, hits a 3, and then pulls up from the Jersey Mike's logo near half court and nails it. The place goes insane, and I think he just loves those moments. It's just a matter of kind of tempering those down and not tempting that every time. Because I think if he can find that balance, has a chance of being one of the best offensive players, the best one-on-one player for sure Rutgers has ever had. And this season, definitely one of the best, shot creating, shot making, I should say, guys in the Big Ten.
A lot of times with high school players, the biggest adjustment is the physicality and adjusting to, just the rigors of a long Big Ten season. We've seen it countless times over the years. Guys will come in highly ranked and, they can get humbled a little bit, right? Because they're going, this is an 18 or 19-year-old kid going up. A lot of times now in college basketball, you're going up against 23, 24-year-old, guys who are just different physically. How is he going to deal with that adjustment physically? Is he already ready from a physical standpoint, or is there still work to do in terms of getting him stronger and getting him ready to go against other Big Ten guys who are, a lot of times when a guy's more skilled than you or, is the better athlete, guys try to slow you down by bumping you and hitting you on cuts and things like that, and just to try to wear you down over the course of a game. How is he ready and equipped to deal with that?
Yeah, it's a great question. That's another big question mark here, how he'll adjust to the college game. I think a lot of people when they bring up him, they bring up Kevin Durant, not just because of the shot making, but because everyone's seen the screen grabs of him in college looking like a beanpole, and he still was one of the best players in the country. So I think that's what people are hoping for. I don't see, I watched him practice a couple times this summer. I don't see him growing 20 more pounds of muscle. I don't think he's going to be able to match these guys physically, but he's going to have to be able to finesse it and find his way around. Like you said, the Big Ten is maybe the most physical league in the country, or at least they like to tout themselves as that. So you're going to have to figure out how to deal with that, both physically and kind of emotionally, right? Because it's probably annoying every time you try to run around a screen, you get bumped or you get hit when you're trying to, take a shot. So I think he'll have to adjust to that. But I think he's played some of the best teams in the country, some of the best players in his class. He's with Team USA at Nike Hoop Summit. Like he's played high caliber talent. So I think he can adjust to that, but you never really know until the ball's in the air.
So Harper's obviously a different player, different position. I think he'll have obviously the ball in his hands a ton. as a like kind of the lead creator for Rutgers. I'm not saying that Bailey's not going to have those opportunities, but I think looking at how this roster is set up, it seems like Harper is going to be and oftentimes the guy who's running the show, so to speak. What in your eyes is makes him such an intriguing prospect from watching him in high school? And obviously we're familiar with his brother. His brother was, Indiana fans remember him well for that shot that he made in Assembly Hall. And, it seemed like for many years there, he just completely had Indiana's number. So I'm sure Dylan Harper, he was recruited by Indiana. I'm sure he's looking forward to the opportunity to come to play in Bloomington this season. Out of Rutgers and Indiana play once only, and it's in Assembly Hall. That's going to be a tremendous atmosphere. But I'm curious, just from Harper's perspective, what makes him such a great prospect in your eyes? And you know, Steve Pikiell's teams historically are just so disciplined in terms of how they run the show. Is there any does it feel like he's ready to kind of for that responsibility to kind of be handed the keys to the team as a freshman?
Yeah, again, these are things that you think will work out, but you don't really know until you're in the moment. But I've watched Dylan Harper play dozens of times over the last couple of years. He's right up the road from where I live here in Jersey, so I popped into Don Bosco as much as possible. I don't remember him having a bad game. I really don't. I think, and a lot of that is because he's so much better than the competition. But even when he played high-level teams, I watched him play McEachern at City of Palms. I watched him play at Hoop Hall, Massachusetts against good competition. I've never seen him have a bad game. They weren't all spectacular, but they were always at least good, very solid, very consistent. I think that consistency is his best asset, kind of in, opposite of Ace Bailey, where Ace Bailey has very high highs and some lows. Dylan Harper is steady. He's physically built. He looks like a college basketball player already, and he's only just turned 18, but he's got the size as far as being 6'6". He's bulky, strong, and he is physically ready for the Big Ten. I don't think those questions that we have about Ace are going to be exactly the same for Dylan. But yeah, as similar to how Big Ten defenses are going to attack him, how will he handle it? I don't know. I think he has the benefit this year of Rutgers adding some shooters around him and Zach Martini and PJ Hayes, and that will hopefully open up the floor for him because I think if he gets enough one-on-one matchups, he's shown the ability to get by his guy. He's a really tough finisher around the rim. I don't know if he's a great shooter yet. It's hard to tell. High school stats are, they are what they are, and the line is shorter, all that stuff. So I'm not quite sure he's a great shooter, but if he gets to the rim, he's finishing it a lot. He's been really, really good at that. And then, you hope that you have the guys around him can do their part because as a distributor, I think he's pretty solid there too. So, again, the questions, like you said, is he going to be able to handle being the point guard at a Big Ten school and all the attention is on you? I think he's mature enough. At least he's shown himself to be. But again, I don't want to, I keep saying this, but until they play, you don't really know.
Does he thrive in the big moment like his brother did? It seemed like Ron Harper Jr. always like embraced the big moment, no matter where it was. There was countless games where he would just put Rutgers on his back, and whether it was at the rack or on the road, he was kind of the guy that you knew was going to take the shot or the guy with the ball in a key situation. And most of the time he was able to come through. Is Dylan similar in that regard?
Yes, I think they're very similar, like personality wise. They have this fun dynamic where they keep like trying to one up each other. Ron won 2 high school championships, and Dylan kept saying he needed to win at least one to keep up. Dylan is saying he wants to have the best home record in program history, which currently is owned by the team that his brother starred on. Like they have this really fun, young brother dynamic of wanting to one up each other. And I think that Dylan Harper, is a winner. Steve Pikiell likes using that as a personality trait in guys, like guys that want to win, guys will do what it takes to win. And I think he is a killer like his brother. I really do. I think they have that some guys just don't have it. I think they both kind of have it, and I think that's part of why Dylan Harper is so good.
So obviously, there's been a ton of turnover with the roster. There's no that's not unique to Rutgers in any way. But looking kind of at the roster for next season, I'm counting just 3 guys who are back from last year's team in terms of scholarship players. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that seems to be kind of the number that they've arrived at. And obviously, to me, kind of looking at it on paper, the most substantial loss was Amori, leaving to go to Alabama. Was that surprising to anybody at Rutgers that he decided to leave after this year? And how impactful is that loss in terms of just what he brought from a defensive perspective, particularly in the paint?
I don't know if it was a major surprise. I thought maybe testing the NBA draft waters was more likely, but I think there was always a chance that he was, calling. He was very, very emotional senior day. Like that felt like a very obvious tell that he was, heading in another direction. And look, it's hard to blame a guy when you're the one of the best defensive centers in the country, and there's a lot of value for you there, whether that's testing the NBA waters or you enter the transfer portal. And for a long time, he was the top center on the board. Teams were fighting over him. I don't know how much money he got at Alabama, but it was a lot more money than he would get at Rutgers, absolutely. So I think he, from a business standpoint, from a personal standpoint, it's hard to blame him, and I don't think anyone was really surprised by it. They lose again a defensive anchor that was the reason they were so good defensively last year. As bad as they were in a lot of areas, they were one of the best 2-point defenses in the country because of what he brings, not only blocking shots, but just his presence at the rim, his length, his size, his athleticism. That's hard to replace. That's why Alabama, feels like he's kind of the missing piece for them there. They did not get a center in the portal. A lot of competition for a lot of guys in the portal, and a lot of competition means a lot of money thrown around. And Rutgers, yes, a lot of people question how did Rutgers get 2 lottery picks and they don't have money for a center. It's hard to explain really, but that's just the reality of it is, right? And they feel very good on the other side about Emmanuel Ogbole, one of the 3 guys coming back. Guy was a junior college transfer last year, was coming off a torn ACL, March of his sophomore year, so he didn't really get into rhythm. He didn't have a summer. He came in midway through the year, was playing backup to Cliff Omori, and they feel that with a full off season, development from the coaches, he's physically there, and that if they can teach him defensively, that he can kind of be a solid enough center, which you only really need him to block shots, defend the rim, run to the rim offensively, set some screens, and whenever you do get the ball around the rim, finish, which was the one major hole in Cliff Omori's game. He just could not finish the ball around the rim. Took some hard shots, yes, but even the simplest layups, he just felt like it was a 50-50 shot if he made them. So expectations for Emmanuel Ogbole are not what they would be for Cliff, I don't think, but I think this team has so much more talent outside of the center position. Last year, center was the focal point. He was their best player by a long shot. This year, I think they have so many more better players around center that center just has to be, again, a player that does the simple things, block shots, runs to the rim, finishes, all the dirty work that you want from a prototypical Big Ten center.
Does losing him in the paint as that defensive anchor, how much do you have any sense of how much Rutgers will move back defensively just as a team? Is that a major concern, or do you think they're good enough elsewhere where they can kind of overcome that?
I think they are good enough elsewhere as far as they bring a lot more length to this team. Last year's team was the shortest team, the lowest average height of any Steve Pikiell team at Rutgers. They've gotten back to their preference of having long, tall wings that can kind of defend the perimeter. And I don't know if any guy on this team is quite Caleb McConnell, but similar to that mold of guys who can kind of affect ball handlers and defend everywhere else. And I think Emmanuel Ogbole has the size to be a good enough rim protector. Not Cliff Omori, but good enough. It's just going to be a matter of, can you avoid foul trouble and can you kind of keep yourself in the game? Because the backup center is this kid, a four-star freshman. His name is Lathan Somerville. He's much more of an offensive center, can shoot a 3, can finish better, can be more of a creator offensively, but is just not there defensively. He's not as athletic. He's not as tall as Ogbole. He's not as big. So that's kind of the question. But yes, defensively, I'm not sure they'll take a huge step back. They might not be a top 10 defense again, but I'd be surprised if a Steve Pikiell team isn't the top, 25, 40 defensive team. You just got to find it in other ways. And I think they have enough guys in the backcourt. Ace Bailey, really long. Dylan Harper, Jeremiah Williams is a solid defender. Those guys can kind of clean up the other deficiencies.
In terms of the portal, they did add 4 players: Zach Martini, Tyson Acuff, Jordan Durkak. Is that pronounced right?
Yep.
And PJ Hayes out of San Diego. Of those 4 guys, I mean, which of those, I guess, 4 are expected to be major impact pieces right away in terms of starting, playing a ton of minutes?
I'd say Zach Martini. He could also be kind of a stretch 5 if they want him to be. That's what he played really at Princeton. But I see him more as a 4, the 3-point specialist that they've needed. He's been 2 years in a row as a really, really good 3-point shooter, and he can kind of bang around in the paint. I'm concerned with a couple of these guys as far as their perimeter defense. I'm not sure how, laterally agile PJ Hayes and Zach Martini are. I just have to see it. I haven't seen it at this level, but they certainly can shoot the ball, and that's what they add. They add what they did not have last year, what they have not had for a majority of Steve Pikiell's tenure, is guys who can catch and shoot at a really high clip, around 40%. Jordan Durkheim's more of a defender type. He's not really going to be scoring much, but he's again long and was the defensive player of the year in the NEC, which again is a big drop in level, but that's still there's still something to be said there. I think they'll depend him as kind of like a defensive change of pace if they need to add a guard to lock a guy down or anything like that. And Tyson Acuff is just, I think he'll be the first guy off the bench as like this sixth man popcorn scorer, a guy you need if you haven't had a bucket in 3 minutes, you put him in and hope that he could kind of resolve that because he was the eighth leading scorer in the country last year. He's dealing with a foot thing. He broke his foot during summer workouts, but they expect him to be back once they start training camp in September. And I think he'll be kind of a guy that has a role, not a starting role, but he'll have a pretty big role as a scorer if they need a guy in a game that things just aren't going their way offensively.
You mentioned getting a chance to kind of watch some of their workouts this summer. I noticed you had some video that you posted on social media as well. What were some of your bigger takeaways from just getting a chance to watch Rutgers work out this summer?
Sure. It's hard to take anything really major just because I uploaded 5 minutes of their 5-on-5 scrimmage, and that was the only 5-on-5 I watched all summer. A lot of the workouts they have are individual, it's shooting. My big takeaway is Ace Bailey is the real deal. I've seen him play in person in multiple settings before this, but seeing him at the college level against guys at Rutgers stand out offensively, be able to create, just be physically look the part. Again, he was the real deal. We didn't get to see Dylan Harper because he had a procedure on his knee before the start of workouts, and he never got cleared beforehand to play in contact, so we haven't been able to see him. But guys like PJ Hayes, lights out shooters in drill settings, which you take that for what it's worth. And then the center position, again, I think is the biggest question mark. We kind of knew that on paper, but to see it, in person, Emmanuel Ogbole looked great scoring against Zach Martini, who's 3 or 4 inches shorter than him. I'm not sure I can extrapolate that for against a guy like Xavier Booker, for example, or is he going to be able to score against him? I don't know. Those are my big takeaways, but I'm not sure I could make any sweeping conclusions here based on what I saw. Just kind of a lot of guys running back and forth and shooting drills and stuff like that.
Is there any sense that this season can lead to a different approach for Rutgers in the future in terms of how it recruits, or is this kind of are people around the program kind of viewing this as a one-off situation where you're going to get these type of guys? I'm not saying you can get 2 lottery picks every year, but do you think this opens up any opportunity if things go well to continue to kind of dabble in the waters of getting McDonald's All-Americans, which is something we've not seen at Rutgers? At least I don't know much of their history before they entered the Big Ten. Obviously, they weren't good for a long time, but it seems like this is obviously the 2 most notable guys they've had in a long, long time. And I'm curious if there's any sense as to whether this can be something that they can parlay into maybe continuing to get high level recruits in the future if things go well.
Sure. I think that would be something they'd sign up for immediately. They did try to continue the momentum in the 2025 class and targeted some really big names, guys like Trey McKinney, who's a 5-star point guard, Darius Acuff, a 5-star guard out of Michigan. Both those guys have a connection to assistant coach Marlon Williamson, who's from out in the Midwest. They targeted them, and they felt like they had a chance in the race. But, for example, Darius Acuff committed to Arkansas and John Calipari. Trey McKinney has dropped his top 10, and Rutgers isn't on it. And they've just kind of, one by one with these highly touted 5-star kids, just have not – they've struck out, essentially. And now in the 2025 class, I would expect much more of the usual kind of, under-the-radar kids, maybe one borderline 4-star, but the recruiting you've seen in the past – that could change if they do have a good year, if they can prove that they can develop these lottery picks and take the potential they have and see it through that in April they're getting selected top 5 in the NBA draft. Recruiting is hard to predict, and a lot of this is also funding. Are you going to have the NIL money? I think Rutgers is in a good position being in the Big Ten where you're going to have the massive media rights deal and you're going to be able to pay them directly with that house settlement. But even these top 10 kids, I imagine in the future will garner significant NIL money outside of that salary, if you to use that expression. So are they going to be able to compete in the marketplace? The first few years of the NIL world say no, but maybe you have a big season this year. Maybe you tap into the many, many boosters that have been sitting on the sidelines for the history of Rutgers athletics to get them excited about a Sweet 16, a Final Four run, and their pockets open. But outside of that happening, I think they'll be having a kind of an uphill climb to replicate whatever they're doing this year. This year just feels like, again, once in a lifetime, just a special opportunity in front of them.
So what are realistic expectations for Rutgers this season as a team? Is there you kind of mentioned this kind of all building up to this, and like this is how pivotal this season is getting to the tournament and winning a game. Is that good enough? Is it we got to get to the Elite Eight? We got to at least get to the second weekend. What and you've got a great pulse on the fan base, and obviously been around the program for a long time. Like, what would be considered a success, and what are people expecting?
I think people are expecting and hoping for a Final Four. I think that you feel like you have all this talent. You have a coach that's been here for a long time and is, again, like you said, building all up to this. This is an opportunity they want to take advantage of, and they feel like there is enough there because I think once you get into the tournament, you get a good draw. If things work out, there could be a path there, but you never really know how these things work out, obviously. But I think the fans in July, when everything is going well, I think you hope for a Final Four. I think realistically, to me, a, a good season where you'd be satisfied is a trip to the Sweet 16, where they haven't been since 1979. And there is a chance if you get a good enough seed and you get placed in the East Regional, you're playing a Sweet 16 game in Newark, 30 minutes away from campus. That place will be packed with Rutgers fans, and you'll have an experience that, again, it will be completely unique. The hype for that will surpass maybe any Rutgers athletics event outside of the '06 Louisville game, and maybe even past that if they win. So I think that is, once you hit that, everything else is kind of gravy. I think a national championship is the really, really optimistic people are hoping for, but I think that's a bit unrealistic. Not that I don't think they could win, but I think expecting that is just a bridge too far. And I would say the bare minimum, the absolute bare minimum, is making the tournament. If this team does not make the tournament, it will be a complete and utter disaster and a failure. Again, outside of injury to one of the two top guys or weird circumstances. I think that's always a caveat there. But I think under normal circumstances, you have to make the tournament. And hopefully, I think they're good enough to compete in the top half of the Big Ten, maybe get a top four spot, get a double bye. And, if things start off well in the league, maybe compete for a league championship because I'm not sure they'll have a better opportunity to do so than now. So I think those are all kind of, to answer your question, make it Sweet 16. I think you're good. And then be in the race for the Big Ten title by the start of February. I think if either of those two things happen, you feel like you've had a really good season and you've lived up to some of the hype entering it.
Last thing before you, Brian, thanks again for your time this week on Podcast on the Brink. Rutgers and Maryland were, the new guys in the Big Ten now the last couple of years. Now we've got 4 new teams joining the conference. As someone that covers the league, on the East Coast, what's it like now having these 4 West Coast programs, and how's that going to kind of change your coverage of the league, if at all? Will you get a chance to, do you think, go to the West Coast for any games at all? And how do you think overall it changes just the overall dynamic now for the league having teams literally on the opposite side of the country from each other?
It'll ruin my sleep because I'll be up at 11 p.m. watching, the tip off for Washington, Illinois, or whatever. So that'll be annoying, but I think it'll be fun. It'll be different. It'll add a change of pace. I'm not sure what the Big Ten felt when Rutgers and Maryland entered. I'm not quite sure people were excited per se, but it was, an injection of something new. And I think that's kind of just the deal here with these 4 teams. Travel is going to be a big topic. I imagine that most of these teams that make the trip will make kind of a swing, like if you're going to play 2 LA teams, you'll play them both in the same weekend or whatever. I think that's, perfectly reasonable. I don't think the Big Ten is going to make some crazy, Rutgers plays USC, travels back to play Indiana at home, then goes back to play Washington. I think that concern is a little overblown. But it should be exciting. And I think that, for Rutgers, like from their perspective, having a good year, the last thing you want is 4 new teams that are all elite basketball programs coming in and making things harder. I'm not quite sure that's the case with, any of these teams outside of maybe UCLA. I think maybe we'll have a good year, but I don't think you're really scared of USC, Washington, or Oregon. I haven't done my full homework on those teams, but that's my initial feeling. So I think it's good. I think it's fun, and hopefully, if they play out there this year, I'll make a road trip out of it and spend some time in LA.
Good stuff. Well, Brian, it's going to be a fascinating season. I think watching Rutgers, one of the reasons we wanted to have you on was just kind of going to go around the Big Ten a little bit and talk to different people who cover various programs. And Rutgers came to mind first, just because of the unique circumstances with adding these 2 players in Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey. So thanks again for the time. Really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, Alex. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, everybody, as always, for listening to Podcast on the Brink. If you enjoy the show, please leave us a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts. Leave us a 5-star rating over on Spotify, and we'll be back soon with another episode of Podcast on the Brink.